Afternoon. I'm in the studio. I wasn't last week, but we are live back on YouTube here for Reform Forum Live for Friday, February 28th, 2025. As you may know, my name is Camden Bucey. I'm happy to be here recording from Libertyville, Illinois. Checking all the feeds, making sure everything's running, and it is. Thank you very much for joining. I hope more people will start piling on in the live stream. I need to figure this out so I can work through Riverside to a scheduled thing. They say they've got that feature now, but it didn't work last time I tried it, so I'm a little hesitant. But I'm here now. We're live, and we have with us at least one of our regulars, and then one of our friends are happy to speak with. Let me introduce to you first. We have Lane Tipton, pastor of Trinity OPC in Easton, PA, and fellow of Biblical and Systematic Theology here at Reform Forum. Welcome, Lane. It's good to see you. How are you doing?
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm relaxing. This is a fun venue for me. So
oh yeah, we love this. Here. I love the Friday afternoon. So last Friday we were just in Oklahoma City for our seminar on redemptive history. Had a really great time, and now we're back home and continuing the work. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But I'm really excited and happy to have with us a friend of mine, Dan Borvan, who serves as a pastor of Christ Reformed Church in Anaheim, California, which is a URCNA congregation. Welcome, Dan. People will know who you are, but welcome here over to our side of things at Reform Forum. It's good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Sunny day in Southern California. Nothing's on fire. So it's a good day.
It's 55 here. It's manageable. You know Chicago, and Dan, of course,
I'd be wearing shorts and a tank top if I were in Chicago today.
Exactly. Dan's of course been he's been on our program. Well, he's been here at Reform Forum to the studio. We hosted a whole symposium, colloquium thing on the Reformation in the Francophone world. Had a great time talking about some of those things. And Dan's done some tremendous work in the French Reformation and understanding the background there, which is useful for us today. But Dan, of course, also is not only serving a URCNA congregation, but appears regularly. I don't know exactly if you have a title. Have they bestowed a title upon you over at Abounding Grace Radio, or are you like sidekick? Are you in the wings to take over?
I used to call myself the wacky sitcom neighbor, but I'm on too regularly for that now. So I'm not quite the co-host, but yeah, I'm kind of titleless at this point, which is fine with me.
Yeah, maybe you could. Yeah, the wacky sitcom neighbor. There's so many great examples. What was Don Knotts in Three's Company? What was his name?
Mr. Roper.
Mr. Furley.
Mr. Furley. Yeah, Furley.
And then, oh man, that's such a great trope. Yeah, that diminishes you. You were much more than that. But I like that.
He's Kramer.
Yeah. Now you're striking at the vitals here, because Dan, of course, loves a good reference. I was joking beforehand. We've joked before offline. And Dan always appreciates a great 1980s WWF reference too.
Well, I'm going to write a book called 101 Sermon Illustrations from Seinfeld. Unfortunately, nobody under 40 would get it.
So I was just talking to I was flipping through YouTube on our TV with my son was sitting around. We were looking for a clip to watch or something, and a Seinfeld clip popped up. And I said, "Oh, Seinfeld." He says, "What's that?" And I go, "That's this old show." He goes, "Huh? How old is it?" He said, "When was it on TV?" I said, "Well, it started in 1989, but it was all through the 90s. It was the most popular thing out there, biggest show ever." He says, "Well, not ever, but at the time." He said, "Huh? The 90s." He goes, "So the late 1900s." And I said, this is my first experience with the difference. I was like, oh, he didn't say it ironically. He wasn't joking.
So funny.
It's just conceptualizing, like, to him, the 1990s is just a completely different world. And so it might as well be, but yeah, it's one of those things. It's crazy. Well, guys, I was hoping we could start up and talk about a handful of things. I'd like to hit up the Oklahoma City conference, the seminar real quick, and let people know how to follow up and at least watch the podcast. Then we'll get.
Well, you want to see my tchotchkes first?
Well, I was going to get to that. We'll do that.
Okay.
Do that next. We'll do
the important part.
That's segment 2. Then we got a new book, a Reform Forum book we can announce. This is a pre-pub copy, but it's available for sale now. And then got a conference we're going to be at, a Greenville conference. And then we're going to get into our main topic if we have plenty of time. We're going to talk about pastoral training, ministerial training, and the need for ministers because we're looking at a shortage down the pipeline. So that's a problem. We're going to talk about it and what to do about it. So first, Lane, I'd love maybe to get your reaction about the Oklahoma City seminar. For people, I've been mentioning it over and over and over. But just on Friday night, we had a reception at the Lively Hotel in Oklahoma City. We had a live podcast episode that was recorded. It's now out and available today, Friday, February 28th. You can watch it. Marcus Mininger was with us. And then on Saturday morning, we had a breakfast. And then me and Lane and Jim, in that order, lectured on seeing Christ in all of Scripture, that God has spoken, the unfolding message of his Son to his people. What were your thoughts, Lane? Did you have a good time? Do you think it was a success?
I've got three, no particular order, but number one, I thought the discussion with Dr. Mininger was wonderful. It was delightful to hear him reflect on the doctoral work that he did on Romans 1 through 3. I loved what he had to say about Hebrews 6. I think that has some wonderful fruit that it will bear in Reformed scholarship and in a Reformed understanding of that text. And I thought our panel discussion was wonderful. Secondly, I thought the coherence of the three lectures was tremendous. Of course, we talked about it. Of course, we had it organized in advance. But I think you, Camden, did a phenomenal job in terms of clarifying the theology of natural and special revelation, natural and supernatural revelation in a Reformed tradition. I thought Jim's talk on Christian identity in heaven was delightful. And then third, the fellowship was really nice. Of course, we were in a great hotel. There was great food. It was a wonderful venue, but it was all things together, all those things working together. It was just right. Maybe it's being so close to Texas that helped me too, but I just loved it. So it was great.
Not just Texas, but the Panhandle.
It was
closer
great.
to where you grew up. I thought it went really well. I was so happy that we were able to execute on that. I want to thank the staff for all their help and the team here at Reform Forum for getting that done, as well as those who supported and underwrote the event. It was really critical and important that we could make this available and accessible to everyone. There were a lot of locals there, and we were able to make the event free, but we still had people flying in and coming, and having it all in one location was really beneficial. So people could fly in, even if they got a ride to the airport or from the airport to the hotel, you could just do everything all in one spot. And Ryan, Noah, and I stayed around and we worshiped at Grace Bible Church. Phil Bowersox is a pastor there. We met there on Sunday morning, had a great time of worship, and it was great. We really, really appreciated it, had a good time. And hopefully, I was just talking to Dan before this, and I've mentioned it to you too, Lane, in our chat, just about wanting to package this up and see if we can take it on the road and do a similar thing in other cities. As I've been pitching, if anyone's interested, I've got some suggestions. But if people think that this would really be something that would do well in your area and would be of benefit to the church in your location, we'd be happy to talk and see if it's something that we might be able to fit on the schedule in the future. All right. Last thing I'll mention on this, of course, the podcast is available. You can watch that. It's out. It's on YouTube on our podcast channels. You can, but the videos we're not releasing yet. They have been published to all the people, and links have been given to all the people who registered for the event. So if you'd like to see these things, we'll have some written material in the future. Not the full versions, but we'll have some accompanying resources that'll be along these lines. But it's another motivation to try to come to one of these events, or if you would like to have one in your area, if you can want to learn and follow up and hear the lectures. All right, let's talk about office items. 2 weeks ago, last time we did a live stream, I was talking to Joe Crispin and Bo Collins. Lane, you know both of these guys. These are my now. Yes. Bo has moved on to North Carolina, so he's no longer local. But these were my two local PCA friends. Bojo, I call him coordinately, or Jobo. And we were talking about funny office items. One of which I have in here is the box from Lil Nitro, the world's hottest gummy bear, is behind me back there. I've got the Reform Forum sign, by Austin, and we've got a bunch of different cool things. Lane, you've got some OPC relics, I know, in your office, and in my actual office I do too. But Dan, I am dying to hear what you have. I know you got some cool stuff. You got some good Chicago items that I appreciate.
I've got. Let's start off with Wrigley Field Diamond Dust. This is holy ground contained here, so I genuflect to that sometimes. As you know, Camden, I am the Bishop of Festivus bestowed by Presbycast. So our church secretary made a candle. I guess this is a prayer candle of me with a bishop's hat. So you'll see those in the merch store soon.
You like the Genevan gown, but I've never seen you with a hat.
Yeah, I think I'd probably get defrocked if I broke that out for worship, but we'll see.
Around here we've got the University of St. Mary on the Lakes. There's a Pontifical Institute nearby. Matthew Levering teaches there. It's a big deal. I mean, they can offer those pontifical degrees, but they also have one of these hats from Cardinal Newman. It was one of his hats. Oh. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. This is my honest thought. I went in there, and but we can be kind of iconoclastic. We're Reformed, right? But I in the library, they have his hat, and it's one of those like boxy ones. It's only about this tall. It's not the big pointy one, but it's the red thing, and it looks like a red velvet Chinese takeout box. Like, the kind where it's square, but then you fold the top in like this. It looks exactly the same size as everything as a Chinese takeout box. So I don't know if you got his Chinese takeout in red velvet, but that looks like what Cardinal Newman had. So,
well, we're about 5 miles from the Nixon Library.
Oh, you can't.
So I have
like Lane's mom will like that.
Two of my favorite guys there, Elvis and Nixon, together. I got that at the library.
You think Elvis had his handgun on him in that picture?
Oh, he only had about 8 guns on his person that day.
Probably tried to give Nixon one.
Look at my gun.
Then I have Ernie Banks. This was given to me by a member of our church. Ernie Banks baseball card, Cubs. So that's good. And probably my prized possession. I picked this up in Boston at a thrift shop a few years ago. It's a membership in the Purgatorian Society. So I'm a perpetual member. I figure this is like bequeathed to me, even though I'm not the signee. Perpetual member of the Purgatorian.
It's like a stock and bond or whatever. You've got to
exactly.
Whoever is in possession of the paper has
9/10 of the purgatory benefits. I'm a perpetual member of the Purgatorian Society, and I have all the spiritual benefits of perpetual membership. So I got that going for me, which is nice.
And you found that at a pawn shop or a thrift store in Boston.
In Boston, yeah.
So they're just selling all these spiritual benefits at a discount.
Hedging all my bets.
Man, I think the bet, and I come to think, I thought when I got lobster mac and cheese at the Public House near Boston College, that was the best thing I could have bought there. I didn't know. My word.
There's a lot you could get in the Archdiocese of Boston, if for the right price.
Yeah, good and bad, yeah, for sure. My word. Well, that's nuts. Lane, you got any funny things or hanging around the office you're willing to talk about?
I've only got one thing that I keep right next to me here, and it looks like Herman Ritterboss was caught in a concentration camp, and they took his picture. And so I have that, and I look at that anytime I get just I don't know. Anytime I need some encouragement, I look into those eyes and think, I can't be suffering as much as he was when that picture was taken.
That's about the polar opposite of that famous picture of him smoking a cigarette. Who is he? He
was with Stoney. He's with
Stonehouse,
Stoney,
of course.
Yeah.
Well, it's a Stonehouse died of early, too much smoke. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid he did. And Ritterboss looks like he was close behind right there. So that's just one thing about it. I guess I'll say one other thing. A member of my congregation gave me this around a decade ago. It's a little homage to Texas boot. I was hoping it wasn't a symbol of their plans for me as pastor, but it wasn't. It was affectionate. So I got that, and so that Couple
You just got to
things.
get some Texas dirt
I
next
can't.
time you're down there and dump
Yeah,
it
I
out
have
in the dirt.
I have no sacred dirt, nor do I have a membership in something that gives me Gnostically
Spiritual
conceived
benefits.
spiritual benefits. I don't boast anything of that.
But you probably
God.
have honorary citizenship to the state of Texas should they secede. So that's a
Yeah,
good
the
thing.
nation of Texas,
That's always
for
that's
sure.
always
You're
there.
natural born.
That's
Well,
right.
guys, we've got some great things. We've sent an email out about this, but I'm holding in my hand a draft pre-sale copy of our latest book, and real copies are available in our listing on Amazon. Head over to Amazon.com. I think should be available on our website as well. But this is Ordinary Means, Extraordinary Ends, Word, Sacrament, and the Great Commission. It is a collection of our addresses, but it does read like a book. It's a very integrated, cohesive theme from our conference back in September 2024. So it has contributions from Lane, Jim Cassidy, Carlton Wynn, myself, and Doug Clausen. And it also includes Jim and my addresses from the Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary pre-conference last year. So if you're interested in the Great Commission, I'm really proud of this. I'm glad we were able to do this. It looks wonderful. We're thankful to our friend Francisco for putting the cover together. Very simple, understated cover that I think is really nice and gets the theme across. But take a look at that if you haven't already. Get copies of that. And while I already mentioned the Greenville conference, we're going to be at it this year. Ryan Noah and I will be working the table. So if you're going to be down in Greenville, South Carolina, it's March 11th through 13th. They're hosting a conference, their confessional conference. The theme is The Pastor, His Call, Character, and Work. And Carlton Wynn, one of our faculty, is going to be speaking at the conference. So if you'd like to hear Carlton, if you'd like to stop by our table and talk about Reformed theology, history, apologetics, biblical theology, all that stuff, we'd love to have you. We go to this conference every single year. It's one of the high points of my year, especially the Wednesday men's fellowship, all the good time that we have together. We love it. We're looking forward to being back. So come see us there at Greenville for their conference. All right, guys, lots of fun stuff. Now we're through the news portion and the fun levity portion. I feel like we should have a skit. If this was like, I kind of conceptualized this Friday live stream as my daytime version of a Reformed late night talk show, like the Graham Norton show, particularly, because you got everyone on at the same time. We talk, we focus on specific topics. We don't have any skits or any sketches lined up today. Maybe we'll think about that for next week. But Dan, you were suggesting to me one little point that we could talk about. And I've been thinking about this for a time. I serve on the board of Mid-America Reformed Seminary. Of course, Lane, for many, many years, was serving in the seminary context, teaching and training ministers for the gospel. But one thing that you mentioned to me was something that would be worth talking about and hashing out and thinking through the issues is just ministerial training and the crisis that we're perhaps encountering now, but certainly will even more so in the future, having a lack of ministers. We've talked about it in the past. Ryan and I are working on efforts to try to provide resources for ministers around the world, because a lot of guys in other contexts, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, don't have seminaries nearby and can't necessarily get to one. But that's not just a foreign problem. It's going to be a problem for us. Yesterday, I interviewed some RCUS guys, and they've got a big crisis in terms of finding ministers for their churches. So, Dan, what have you noticed? What do you see? I'd love to hear about your thoughts coming from a URCNA perspective, but of course, we can speak more broadly as well.
Yeah. We currently have 22 vacancies in the URC, which is more than anyone's ever heard of in the URC.
Wow.
Usually it's under 10. And I've never seen it over 20. Other guys, nobody's ever faced this before. And then a few weeks ago, one of the Canadian, so our churches, of course, are in the United States and Canada. And one of the Canadian pastors ran some numbers, some stats. And if I read them right, they predict, they've determined that 21 men in Canadian churches, URCs, will reach retirement age within 5 years. So 65. So obviously not everybody's going to retire exactly at 65, but we're going to have 20 more vacancies within the next 5, 10, 15 years, just in Canada.
Yeah.
So it might not be at a crisis level yet, but if things continue down this path, it could be a crisis in the URC, at least, of a lack of ministers. Nobody's faced this before in our churches.
I don't know the current numbers regarding OPC vacancies, but there are always several. That's just natural, for better or for worse, for various reasons. But when you also think about current vacancies and need, and then start to think about the breakdown of just the demographics of current ministers, and it's inevitable that we're going to see quite a few more retire. Then the question is, when they are out of the pulpit, when they're retiring, moving on, what do you do, and where are you going to find replacements? And that's a big question. And where do you look? You look to the seminaries, but are they going to have enough students graduating to fill these spots?
Right. And when I was coming out of seminary in 2011, there was a surplus of candidates. We had very few open pulpits at the time. And now it's the exact opposite. And I think fewer guys are going to seminary. I don't know what what the reason is behind that we have fewer men desiring to enter the ministry. But it's something we definitely need to plan for as the baby boomer generation kind of faces retirement. We need to replace those guys. And that's not even to mention church planting and new churches. We have to replace what we have. And of course, we want more. We want to expand and plant new churches and have new missionaries and everything. So we're going to need an influx of men entering the ministry in the next 10, 15 years.
Lane, you notice, were there any of these things going on or discussion about this stuff back either when you were in seminary or working through your doctoral program and then early on in your professor life?
No, well, I'll give you this impression. At the time, it seemed that things were cresting. It seemed that there were numbers of men interested in relocating, in doing residential training, and in pursuing a pastoral ministry. There were also a number of men who were about to flood the doctoral market, about to go into to do PhDs, especially in historical theology.
Yeah.
But back then, it seemed to me that there was a kind of a cresting or a rise where numbers of men were concerned that they couldn't get a call because there were so many men seeking it coming out of the seminaries. I don't know. I haven't looked into this. I haven't researched it. I can't say anything definite about it, but I'm wondering if there might be some kind of correlation between the decline in residential study, which is a huge commitment. If you are committed enough to engage in residential study, you're committed to going into pastoral ministry, typically. If now you can just sign on and do a course online, and once you've finished it, get an MDiv, so-called. I wonder if there's possibly some kind of correlation between that form of education and a decline in those who, in light of it, are trying to pursue pastoral ministry. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But times have changed. I'm just not up to speed enough to tell you how and why,
Yeah, I think there are a lot of technological shifts and then even more so cultural shifts that have put us in a different position than we used to be. I wonder if the younger generation who might end up going to seminary is thinking differently than they used to, or if they're getting lazy or just used to convenience and working remotely and all this kind of stuff. I know Westminster Seminary, California, and Mid-America Reformed Seminary are very committed to in-person residential MDiv. We don't offer MDivs remotely at either institution. And I'm wondering also just about the forces. It's weird. It's almost like a chicken and an egg. I'm wondering, what do you guys think about this? Because it seems as if seminary enrollment for several years was down. I think it might be bouncing back up, but it's still relatively generally low. Certainly low with regard to the need and the upcoming need. So if seminary enrollment is down, that there are market forces for better or worse, that often incentivize the seminary, if they want to stay alive and get more income through tuition, to find new students. And the easiest switch to flip, it's not easy, but the easiest switch to flip among the options is probably let's just go online. Then we can find people from around the world. And there isn't always as much regard for, like, what are the long-term effects of that? and then that leads to other downstream problems, no doubt, as well. Because then we have questions of the changing nature of theological education. Have these people had proper in-person instruction or in-church instruction? Have they had proper oversight? There's a million questions we could ask, and I'm no expert on any of this. And people that are offering online education, presumably, at least if it's accredited, have thought about these things. We might have opinions about them, but at least they've thought about them. So none of this is taken in isolation, right? It's all a system. Dan, have you noticed any of that? What's your take on this? We're getting older now, so what's your take on this younger generation?
Yeah,
it would lack of being, wanting to move and study in person.
Right. I think that's a big thing. I would be interested to know the numbers on guys getting online MDivs. How many of them enter full-time ministry? I don't know if anybody has those numbers,
I'm sure.
But I'd be interested to know that. But then too, I mean, it was around in my generation as well, but I have heard from guys like Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy, who's trying to fill the vocational job crisis we have in this country. More young men are unwilling to move from where they live in order to pursue a vocation. And I've heard that just anecdotally, talking to guys, number one, as Lane said, they don't want to leave their house in order to get an MDiv degree. And then number two, when they graduate, should they enter the ministry, they have a specific zip code they're willing to serve in, and I mean, I met guys like that too. When I was in seminary, I'm coming to seminary and then I'm going to go back to my hometown and plant a church. And I would just kind of laugh because, I mean, we're in Nate Park. This isn't the Southern Baptist where they have a church at every corner. Yeah. A church at every corner and almost infinite resources. I mean, be happy you could get a call anywhere. If that's in Fairbanks, Alaska, be grateful. Yeah. The idea that you could, that you could be so choosy and pick which zip code you want to live in, to me, is laughable.
It is. It's a totally different mindset. You sometimes have that problem even in missions. We have certain mission fields available and we want to send missionaries out, but sometimes there can be more of a selectivity. It's like, I feel the Lord, I've heard from people, people involved in our missions, that there's a certain mentality, whereas many years ago, maybe the mentality would have been, we hope, I'm called to missions. Where should I go? Oh Lord, here am I, send me, versus now you're hearing more and more of this. The Lord has called me to this place and to do this thing. Maybe he has, I don't know. The Lord didn't tell me that, but maybe he'll make it evident. But it's a shift. It's definitely a change where you've got an agenda. Maybe it's not an ungodly one or unfaithful. I'm just saying, it's a different mindset. And it is, even with the education, I'm living here, I'm doing this thing, and the seminary's got to come to me. That same mentality seems to me like it trickles or pervades more than just that decision, the education decision. It pervades, the whole lifestyle and mindset.
Well, I used to face that too.
Service. Yeah.
I used to face that too as a student at Westminster, California. Guys would come as prospective students, and it was always the issue, oh, I don't want to come to Southern California. It's so expensive. And I would say, if you're not willing to come for 3 years to get an education, what if God calls you to China and you're not willing to go to Southern California to go to seminary? Like, then maybe you're not fit, dude. If you're not willing to make that sacrifice, I don't know.
Well, it seems also that the seminary leadership and donors have also kind of called that bluff, because now you can go stay at affordable housing that's beautiful and right on campus. And you get to hang. You have this great seminary village, Westminster Village, and this community of all these all these families living right there for 3 years. I imagine you probably have trouble getting rid of the students because they don't want to leave all their friends and buddies.
Get 16 post-grad degrees so to stay in the housing.
Yeah.
Yeah, their housing is fantastic. I'm so jealous of those guys. Every time I go there, I violate the 10th commandment because it's nicer than any apartment I ever lived in as a student.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. One friend of mine who used to be in our presbytery out here in the Midwest. I won't divulge his name, but he was telling me about the place he lived when he was at Westminster, California, with two of his friends, his roommates, both all students. And he was like, there was like live electrical wires near water. Like it was like, none of this is safe. And he's like, we just had to do it. It's the only place we could afford to live in order to still go to school. Lane, you sounded like you actually had a real apartment though that you used to live in with near Adam.
Well, we lived in student housing before it was upgraded, but I'll never forget. I believe it was going into our senior year, final year. When we got back, there was still a tent over it because they were fumigating it to destroy termites. The termites had so damaged the building that if they didn't get rid of them all, it was probably close to being condemned. So, that's a far cry from what these students have now. But I'll make a quick observation on something that I think is important. When you simply engage in online education, which for ministerial training, you have a very small world in front of you. You have an instructor, you have materials that you're reading, you have questions that you answer, and you reflect on it, and you do grow. There's some growth that can be had there.
Sure.
But when you're in a seminary environment, a proper seminary environment, a residential one, you're going to meet brothers and sisters from Ukraine, from China, from Africa, various regions, from Korea. And you're going to see the global church represented, and you're going to learn about the international character of the gospel, of the kingdom of God, of the way the gospel is permeating every region. And your horizons are opened in ways that otherwise they would never be opened. And the disposition is changed to more the Isaianic disposition of, Lord, here am I, send me. And the goal is serving the kingdom rather than living a dream, rather than having a preconceived ideal of where and how I can serve in my local neighborhood. You have a vision for the kingdom corresponding to the book we're doing, Camden, the Great Commission. You see it embodied. And I think that lack of that residential impetus and maybe the shrinking of that, it could be a reason why people don't have a true sense of calling, which really technically is to be willing to serve the Lord wherever he may call you, in whatever circumstances, to take up the cross, deny yourself, and pour your life out and in service to the Lord in the church wherever he may call. That could be eroded by the movement away from the residential concerns, online things, and related.
So what do you think are some next steps? Dan, have you thought about this? What are some things you think we ought to be doing as a church, as ministers of local congregations, but as presbyters, as, thinking about things at a denominational level and even across denominations? If we have this issue, where do we begin? Because you can't just, you don't just throw people into seminary. You got to start even earlier than that. But I'm wondering, how to solve the immediate problem, and then how to think wisely about the future as well, to plan for the future.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think one reason why we're in this predicament, humanly speaking, of course, is that we in the churches have not done a good enough job raising up men, identifying them early in high school, in college, and then sending them off with our blessing to seminary. So I think as Reformed churches, we need to be more proactive. We kind of got lazy, and a lot of guys like locals, we come into the Reformed world, and from what I understand, that's not happening as much anymore. We don't have the same pipeline of evangelicals into the Reformed world, into the Reformed ministry, as we did in the past. So I don't know what the explanation is for that, but we're not getting as many recruits from the evangelicals. So we need to raise them up ourselves. We need to be more proactive in getting these guys early, equipping them early, sending them off to seminary. I know the OPC has the Timothy project, for that.
I was going to ask. Yeah. Does the URC have anything similar?
We don't. Yeah. I would love to see it. We've tried to do that in our own congregation.
Which local congregation would do it?
That's the difficulty, being de facto Congregationalists. I don't know that we could pull that off.
It's a lighthearted jab, but yes.
Yeah, no, I'll take it, and I'll give it to ourselves too. We need the Congregationalist jab. Yeah. But hey, we're doing our part. I take no credit for this. But when I became pastor of this church a year and a half ago, we had three homegrown guys in seminary. So our church is doing a great job, at least. Yeah. But we need to triple our efforts and raise up these guys for the next generation.
Yeah. On that, Dan, I'll give a little testimonial of sorts. I was converted when I was 19, grew up in a Baptist context, clueless in terms of Presbyterian practice, just clueless. Didn't know any Reformed theology, and became a Christian and began reading a lot, numbers and numbers of hours each day. And it reached a point where in my naivete, I was just talking to my pastor, Neil Lodge, to an elder, Jim Halla, about theology, so much so that they said to me, Lane, you need to think about seminary. And I was like, why? And they said, in seminary, people do what you're doing all the time. It's going somewhere, right? You can become a minister of the gospel or teach or do both or something. And they were really, it was really neat, because as a young, naive, Christian without much understanding of how Presbyterianism and pastoral calling works, they were really helpful. So they identified it and said, Lane, do it. And then after, a little while, I read up on it and decided to pursue it. And it was really useful. I wouldn't have had any idea unless they had pointed me in that direction all those years ago. So they were doing that, and maybe that needs to be done more.
Yeah. So Lane, you've had interns in your church. I presume some of them have come from without or through the denomination. Is that correct? Have you had any that have been raised up within the congregation?
I have not. I've really only had two so far, and we're working on a third. Yeah. But we are looking, trying to keep the eye open in terms of the younger ones who are growing up in our midst, to see if there are aptitudes, interests, and gifts and things like that. And as I've learned this more and more as I've pastored longer and longer, I've begun praying along lines that the Lord would raise up from our congregation at Trinity Easton young men who want to pursue pastoral ministry. And and when you do pray that way, you do start looking at them a little differently, start evaluating them a little bit. And
yeah, I think so too. I think you have to have a mind for that, and to have it top of mind, because if you're not thinking about it, praying about it, you tend not to notice it, because it's just not in front of you. Dan, I was wondering about some other factors. You mentioned, I think, 22 vacancies in the URCNA right now. We also have issues in our denomination. I presume the URC might have more than a few that are similar, where you have congregations that have maybe been around for many, many years, and for various economic reasons and other factors, industries moved on. There aren't jobs nearby. People have moved. You think of all these churches in the so-called Rust Belt, but there's a lot of kind of just post-industrial areas out east too, around Philadelphia, New Jersey. And so many of these churches that might have been extremely strong and faithful, might have been leading congregations back in the 40s and 50s, just in terms of their current state. The Lord can do whatever he wants. Granted, nobody's denying that, but I'm just saying in terms of looking at things from just a typical standpoint, the church can't fund itself anymore with its current membership, and maybe even the people that have been there for 50 years are now on fixed income. Who knows? So nothing might have happened to the church theologically. It might not even be that there's necessarily some sort of systemic problem other than there aren't a whole lot of people there. And then the question is, this is another question, because there might be ways to solve this, but can a guy, afford to raise his family and be free from worldly care to minister freely and fully to a congregation if he's, basically going to be at the poverty line?
Right. Yeah. And those places you describe, the church might not be in a position to support a guy fully, but the cost of living hasn't gone down as the attendance of the church has gone down. So you're in an expensive place to live, and you don't have the same membership roles to support a guy in that place. And of course, we experienced that in Southern California, one of the most expensive places to live in the whole country.
Trouble just getting people to come. I was talking to our mutual friend Jonathan, I think, and he was saying, like, the Californians love it. The natives don't want to leave, but it's hard to recruit guys to come in.
Well, we have had a difficult time bringing in guys from outside of California to pastor churches. I'm an unapologetic recruiter for churches in Southern California. So I will try to poach guys from other places around the country who have Southern California roots, because I realize the odds are better of getting native to come back here than to get a guy from New Jersey to come out here, wherever, for the first time, because they look at the cost of living, and it's prohibitive for many people. And I get it. But we need to also think, Carl Truman's been talking about this for years, we need to not think of bivocational ministry as something that should never be discussed, that which shall not be named. We might have to go there in this country. That's a realistic issue we might have to face more and more. That's what Lane in this does. Country. Yeah. In Napark churches, it shouldn't be the thing we don't speak about. We might it might have to be on the table more and more as we face the next generation.
Yeah, I don't think it's optimum, but it's obviously biblical and significant, important, and necessary. I mean, the Apostle Paul was bivocational. But so if we have a place that needs a gospel, and last I checked, every place needs the gospel. But if that place can't afford, or the church is not in the circumstances where it can support a minister fully, then let's figure it out. Maybe that's the thing we need to be thinking about. I've known many ministers that have even retired and still stick around. The minister at my parents' church, labored as a retired minister for years and years, filling the pulpit, doing many things there. We can be more creative and continue to pray that the Lord would raise up ministers and raise up the support for such ministers around the world. But I think that's definitely part of it. In addition to the mindset shift, hey, let's ask the Lord to raise up men, and let's try to whip some men into the shape. Present company always included, but let's always be about serving the Lord and going wherever He leads, rather than having some sort of saved criteria in our list of places we're willing to go serve. So it's both ends, I guess. And then in the middle ground, so it's, ministers being willing to go wherever, about churches being able to support and call, and to train, the seminaries being willing to partner with churches to train, and denominations willing to train and support. But then also, if those two don't meet, then finding a way through bivocational ministry, external support, creative ways of co-laboring to make it work. Because the most important thing is that we're just doing the work of the Great Commission, I don't know. That's my rant. You want to pick up on any of that, Dan, or any additional thoughts on that stuff?
Well, another factor I think we should consider, another option, is combining churches.
Yeah.
If we have two churches of 50 people, and neither one can support a guy full time, or there's a vacancy at one, and they're within driving distance, why don't we combine the congregations into one church that can be self-sustaining and they can find a man to fill the pulpit, obviously within driving distance, but maybe we can't be as comfortable in our commute to church as we have been in the past. We haven't been on the parish system for a while, but some people think they should, it's their divine right to be able to walk to church or drive less than 10 minutes. But in Southern California, I mean, we draw people from probably 50, 75 mile radius in every direction.
Whenever they show up, do they always tell you the route they took to get there?
Oh, of course. Yeah. We love talking about traffic. We don't have any weather to talk about, so we talk about traffic. If you remember the Californians bit on Saturday Night Live from 10 years ago, yeah, that was almost documentary style. But yeah, it might take us 10 or 15 minutes extra to drive, but we could have a viable congregation if we would just combine a few.
Let's think before we wrap up for the day. We can finish the thought, of course, but this whole issue of seminary training is really perplexing, and we're in these shifting landscapes. So this is maybe this particular thing I'm going to mention is a conversation for another day, but I'm not saying this is a good thing or this is not a value judgment, but I imagine that down the road, presbyteries and classes are going to have to do a heck of a lot more work to verify somebody's education. I view it as inevitable. I hope this doesn't happen, but I view it as inevitable where it's just going to be totally a la carte. So it's not, years and years ago, prior to 1812, we had the apprenticeship model. And we had Princeton and several other seminaries in the Presbyterian world. So we went to the seminary model, but that's not eternal. It's not ultimate. I think it's wise and has worked well, but the seminary is not the only way to do ministerial education. But what's going to happen, for better or worse, probably worse, guys are just going to say, well, I did these 9 hours at this institution in person. I did these 12 hours online. I did a self-study on my own by going to this website. I read these books. I did all this stuff. They're just going to come with a pile of records.
I took all the Reformed Forum courses.
Yeah, exactly. Which are not designed for this. Not designed for this. But this is what's going to happen. People are going to come to a candidate's credentials committee and just dump all their stuff on the table and say, is this good enough? And then the problem is, or the burden is in American Presbyterianism, it always comes down to the presbytery to credential ministers. That's where the buck stops there. Who gets ordained? The presbytery decides. Right now, a guy might be charged and might go to the General Assembly, but in terms of who does the credentialing, the presbytery does. And even though presently the presbytery leans on seminaries to provide degrees, and then if it's a decent seminary, we typically take their word for it that these guys have a base level of education, and we do spot checks, with exams, and give them a Greek and a Hebrew exam, English Bible, just to make sure that they know their stuff, but it's not exhaustive because we're assuming that if they got a seminary degree, they did all this other stuff there. We're outsourcing some credentialing to a seminary through the means and the vector of a degree and then verifying it. There's going to come a day where we don't have that. And then what do we do? So, I mean, that's an even bigger problem in terms of the presbytery are going to have, and classes going to have to bear a much heavier burden in training people and then making sure people are apt to teach, that they're qualified, that they've been trained well, and they can handle the scriptures faithfully and accurately, rightly dividing the word. But that's a bigger problem. But the other problem right before us is just getting qualified people into a qualified pipeline, so to speak, and then making sure that we can get them with the right attitude and encourage them, disciple them so that they go out and desire to serve in these churches who just lacking a minister. They're just asking, please send us people.
Yeah. I think one thing to that point, Camden, is we need to make our exams stronger, more difficult, more rigorous. True. As one who was a licentiate in both the OPC and the URC, I've taken a lot of exams, ecclesiastical exams.
Congratulations.
I think they should be harder. I think they should be more difficult. And especially, like you said, we can't rely on the seminaries anymore as just kind of a rubber stamp. through the exam process in the Presbyterian classes. I think we need to do our due diligence to make our ecclesiastical exams more rigorous, right, to ensure that these men are properly prepared.
But doesn't that sound counterintuitive? Because people, I agree with you, but people are going to say, hey, we don't have enough people already. So why do you want to make it harder? Right.
Yep.
You know, like, but what's the alternative? To have like a lowest common denominator approach? Should we like asymptote? There's a $10 word for you. Should we approach every member ministry? Is that the other option?
House churches? Yeah. I would rather have fewer well-trained ministers than an abundance of poorly trained ministers.
Yeah.
And we can face those problems of, you know, how to deal with lack of pulpits. I'd rather deal with that than a problem of a bunch of guys who are poorly trained and the problems they create.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's lots of things we've opened up that are worth discussing and worth figuring out. But most of all, just bring it before the Lord in prayer. Let's do some research. Maybe this live stream will fire up some people to write in and offer their thoughts. But we could pick this back up because this problem isn't going to go away anytime soon. But I'd love to hear. I'd love to have some resolution to some of the things we mentioned. I'd love to have some stats. How many online MDivs, what's the percentage that ends up in pastoral ministry after 5 years, we'll say? And is there a statistically significant difference between the residential? That'd be interesting to know. I'd like to know what the current vacancies are across NAPARC denominations, and if there's a way to see that over time, longitudinally. I'd like to know that. Is it higher than it was? And maybe a forecast of our present ministers in NAPARC churches. You know, what are the expected vacancies in the future given historical retirement ages, et cetera, that kind of stuff. And then I guess another would be just pastoral compensation relative to whatever the standard of living is in those locations. I don't know. There you go. There's a homework assignment for somebody.
Can we get Doge on this? Will Elon take this up for us?
You imagine if there was a Presbyterian or a Continental Doge and they sent an email out to every minister throughout the denominations and said, tell me 5 things you did last week.
You're not the boss of me.
Yeah, you're not the boss of me. That's right. That's for sure.
You're not my elder.
The URC. Yeah, for sure. Man, crazy. Well, Dan, any final comments or remarks maybe before we wrap it up for the week?
Yeah, I think we should obviously be in prayer for this issue, that God would raise up men to fill pulpits in our churches, especially in the next generation. And we can be confident no matter what happens. Yeah. Christ will build his church. We don't need to panic. Christ will build his church as he sees fit. It's all in the providence of God. But we need to be diligent, humanly speaking, in these areas, and certainly be in prayer for this matter.
I agree. Before you go, tell us a bit about some of your recent AGR episodes and anything you have up your sleeve that you're willing and able to share.
Well, we've done a few episodes at Abounding Grace Radio on why are Reformed people so weird.
I saw that one today. Chad was on that, right?
Chad and Scott Clark, Chad Vegas and Scott Clark. I think we have another one coming out with me and Chris Gordon. So you could probably do a whole podcast series on why Reformed people are weird. But that's an area we need improvement as Reformed people, not to be so weird and.
Well, it might be part of the problem that we've been talking about today, you know, where people
don't. Why Reformed ministers so weird?
Well, it might be like why we can't get ministers is because the ones we have are weird, president and company included.
Well, yeah, we attract people like same pole magnets. But we got some good stuff coming. We're going to be doing a podcast with David Bonson next month in March. So look for that. He's got an interesting book out on the doctrine of vocation. So we're going to talk to him. Should be stimulating. So lots coming down the pike.
I love it. Check out Abounding Grace Radio. Probably the best. You can go to the website, but quick access if you head over to YouTube and do a search, and you'll find things there. And I had such a fun time with you and Chris. Thank you for the welcome. Last time I was out to Escondido to sit down. So if anyone who wants to look and watch that episode, we talked about parachurch ministry and some of the behind the scenes stuff we do at Reform Forum and why we do it the way we do, at least trying to be thoughtful. So that was a really, really fun conversation, but there's a whole host. You guys have done a lot of really interesting stuff, and it's worth checking out.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask a favor of the Reform Forum listeners. Please go to our YouTube page and troll Chris in the comment section. Chris faithfully reads the comments and takes them to heart. So please troll him in the comment section. Yeah. Somebody commented the other day. Of course, I sent it to him. They said, this guy is the Mark Driscoll of the URC.
Creative insults encouraged. Go comment and remark on Chris Gordon in the Abounding Grace Radio channel. There you go. We'll see. We'll see if we can get Machen's Warrior Children to march upon the AGR channel and see if it works. That sounds fun.
With friends like these, who needs enemies?
Who needs enemies? All right, everybody. This has been really fun. Dan, thanks for popping in this afternoon. I always love talking to you. I'm glad you can make it. We'll have to have you back, talk about some scholarly stuff as well. If you ever got any papers or books or topics you'd like to talk, or any friends that you'd like to bring around to talk about stuff they've worked on, please let me know. You always got an open invitation. But everyone, you can find us online, of course, reformforum.org. Thanks for watching the live stream. We'll see you, Lord willing, next week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you. Stop. There we go. That was really fun. Lane had to drop off, obviously. I have told